New Year's dinner was loud and crowded, the way my mom liked it. Food covered the table. Glasses clinked. Everyone was already talking over each other when my mom stood up to make an announcement. She smiled and nodded toward my sister Julia. "Your sister just bought a house," she said proudly. Heads turned. People clapped. Julia sat a little straighter, enjoying it. Then she looked at me and smiled in that careful way she always did. "Still renting?" she asked. It wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. The table went quiet enough for everyone to hear it land. A few people glanced at me, waiting to see how I'd react. I smiled back. "I own more than you think," I said calmly. "I just don't announce my wins." Julia laughed, but it came out thin. Her smile stayed on her face for half a second too long. Then it slipped. My mom frowned, confused. Someone cleared their throat. Conversations slowly started up again, but the mood had shifted. Julia avoided my eyes after that. She focused on her plate, on her phone, on anything but me. I didn't explain myself. I didn't need to. I wasn't trying to win the moment. I already knew how this would end, because the truth was simple. I hadn't shared my news for a reason, and soon enough, Julia wouldn't be smiling at the table anymore. Before I tell you what happened next, take a second and tell me where you're listening from and what time it is right now. My name is Sophia, and I learned early not to correct people when they underestimate me. At that table, Julia thought she knew the whole story. Renting meant behind. Quiet meant losing. That's how things always worked in our family. What she didn't know was that I hadn't just been saving. 6 months earlier, I'd signed papers I never mentioned. Not to my parents. Not to Julia. Not to anyone at that table. It wasn't a house in my name. Not directly. It was something better. Something that didn't come with a ribbon or applause. That's why I smiled. Julia thought she'd won because she'd bought something everyone could see. She didn't know I'd bought something no one was supposed to notice yet. When she asked if I was still renting, she wasn't being curious. She was being sure. Sure that the gap between us was permanent. It wasn't. I didn't explain because explaining would have ruined the timing. And timing mattered more than pride. The reason I stayed quiet that night wasn't kindness. It was strategy. Because the next announcement at that table wouldn't come from me. It would come from someone else. And when it did, Julia wouldn't be smiling at all. The rest of dinner moved on like nothing had happened. But it hadn't. Not really. I could feel it in the way people avoided eye contact, in the way Julia laughed a little too loudly at jokes that weren't funny. My mom tried to smooth things over. She asked about work, about travel plans. Normal questions meant to pull attention away from the moment that didn't land the way she expected. Julia played along. She talked about paint colors, closing dates, neighbors she hadn't even met yet. Every sentence was a reminder that her news was supposed to be the headline of the night. I nodded when expected, smiled when required, said very little. Across the table, Julia kept glancing at me. Quick looks. Curious now, not confident. Like she was replaying what I'd said, trying to figure out if it meant anything at all. "You've been quiet," she said finally. "Everything okay?" "Just enjoying the evening," I replied. That answer bothered her more than a challenge would have. Because quiet doesn't argue. Quiet waits. What Julia didn't know was that one of the people at that table already knew the truth. Not the full story, but enough. Enough to understand why I hadn't reacted. Enough to understand why I wasn't impressed. They hadn't said anything yet. They weren't supposed to. Timing mattered. I watched the clock on the wall tick forward, 1 minute at a time, and realized something important. This dinner wasn't the moment. It was just the setup. And when the real moment came, it wouldn't be me who spoke first. After dinner, people moved into the living room. Coffee came out. Dessert plates followed. The night should have relaxed, but it didn't. It hovered. Julia stayed close to my mom, still riding the attention. She showed pictures on her phone. The kitchen, the backyard, the front door with the sold sign barely removed. Every photo came with a comment. "I can't believe I finally did it," she said. "It feels good to own something real." I listened from the couch. She glanced over at me again. You'll get there, she added lightly, like advice, like encouragement, like she was being kind. I smiled and nodded. Across the room, my Uncle Mark set his cup down. He looked at me, then at Julia. His eyebrows lifted just slightly. A question, not spoken. I shook my head once. Not yet. He leaned back and said nothing. That was the moment I knew the plan was still intact. No one rushed. No one corrected her. The story kept playing the way she expected it to. Julia talked about mortgage rates, about how proud Mom and Dad were, about how this was just the beginning for her. She didn't notice that a few people had gone quiet. She didn't notice who stopped asking questions. She didn't notice who started watching instead of listening. I checked my phone. No messages. No alerts. Good. Everything was moving on schedule. Julia thought this night was about celebrating what she'd bought. She didn't realize it was the last night she'd feel like she was ahead. And she had no idea how close she was to finding out why I never announced my wins. The shift came the next morning. I was halfway through my coffee when my phone buzzed. A message from my mom. Short, careful. Can you call me when you wake up? I waited. 10 minutes later, another message came. It's about the house. Not Julia's house. She always said her house. This time, my mom didn't. When I called, she didn't start with small talk. She never did when something felt off. There's a problem, she said. Something we didn't know. I stayed quiet. She explained it slowly, like the words might fall apart if she rushed. A letter, a meeting, a detail no one had paid attention to before. Something tied to paperwork Julia had been so proud of signing. My mom stopped and took a breath. Did you know about this? I knew enough, I said. She didn't ask how. She didn't ask when. Her voice dropped instead. Julia is very upset. I pictured Julia pacing, rereading things, looking for a mistake that wasn't there. What happens now? My mom asked. That depends, I replied, on what she decides to do next. The line went quiet. When we hung up, I didn't feel excited. I didn't feel nervous either. I felt steady, because the truth had finally stepped into the room. And once it does, no amount of smiling can push it back out. By that afternoon, the calls started coming faster. My aunt asked if everything was okay. My cousin texted a single word. Wow. No one explained anything, which told me plenty. News was moving, just not in a straight line. Julia finally called me herself. She didn't yell. She didn't joke. Her voice was tight, controlled, like she was holding something together with both hands. You knew, she said. I knew enough, I replied. How long? She asked. Long enough, I said. She went quiet. I could hear her breathing on the other end. Then she said, Mom says this changes things. It does, I agreed. For me, she added. I didn't correct her. What she still didn't see was that things had already changed before that dinner, before her house, before her question about renting. She just hadn't felt it yet. Julia tried one last angle. You could have told me, she said. We're family. I chose my words carefully. You didn't ask, I said. You announced. That ended the call. Later that night, my mom sent one more message. We need to talk. I didn't answer right away. Some conversations matter more when you let the truth sit with people first. Let them feel it. Let it settle. Because once it does, there's no going back to pretending. And I wasn't interested in pretending anymore. We met 2 days later. Same house. Same table. Different mood. Julia sat stiff, arms crossed. My parents looked tired. No one smiled when I walked in. My mom started. We didn't know, she said quickly. None of us did. I know, I replied. Julia looked at me. So what now? She asked, not curious, defensive. I let the silence stretch for a moment. Now, I said, things get clear. My dad leaned forward. Clear how? In a way that can't be talked around, I said. Julia shook her head. This isn't fair. I met her eyes. It was never fair, I said. It was just quiet. That landed hard. My mom looked between us. "You're saying you planned this?" "I prepared," I said. "There's a difference." No one argued with that. Julia stood up and paced. "You let me think I was ahead." I nodded. "You assumed you were." The room went still again, the same way it had at New Year's dinner. Only this time, no one rushed to fill the space, because the truth was out now. And once it is, everyone has to decide how they're going to live with it. After that meeting, things didn't explode. They thinned out. Julia stopped calling. Not out of peace, out of pride. My parents checked in more often, but carefully now, like they were learning new rules they hadn't written. No one asked me to explain what I owned. No one asked how long I'd planned it. They didn't want details. Details make things real. What mattered was that the balance had shifted. A week later, my mom said it out loud. "We didn't see this coming." "I know," I said. Julia tried to act normal in group messages, shared photos, made jokes, but something had changed. She wasn't announcing wins anymore either. She learned how fast confidence fades when it isn't backed by control. I stayed quiet, not because I was hiding, because I didn't need to prove anything anymore. The thing I owned, the one Julia hadn't known about, wasn't flashy. It didn't come with photos or congratulations, but it came with leverage, with options, with timing. That's why I never announced it. People think silence means you're behind. Sometimes it just means you're ahead and waiting. By the time Julia understood that, the moment to compete had already passed, and I realized something sitting there, watching everyone adjust to the new reality. Winning doesn't always look like standing taller. Sometimes it looks like sitting still while everyone else has to move around you. The truth came out in pieces, not all at once. One cousin asked a careful question. An uncle made a comment he couldn't take back. Someone mentioned a document they'd seen. No one said the full thing out loud, but everyone understood enough. Julia pulled back, less sharing, less smiling. She stopped correcting people when they assumed things about me. That was new. My parents changed too. They asked before assuming. They listened longer than they talked. It wasn't guilt. It was adjustment. One evening, my dad said something that stuck with me. "You always did things the quiet way." I nodded, because the loud way never lasted. He didn't argue. Julia and I spoke once more. Brief, polite, careful. She didn't apologize. I didn't ask for one. Some lessons don't come with words. What mattered was this. The questions stopped. The comparisons stopped. The need to measure everything at the table finally faded. I didn't gain anything new after that. I just kept what I already had. My space, my plans, my peace. And I understood something I'd missed for years. You don't need to announce your wins to make them real. You just need to make sure they're solid enough to stand when the room gets quiet and everyone starts paying attention. By the time spring came, the story had settled into something simpler. Julia still had her house. I still had what I'd built. My parents stopped comparing us out loud. They learned, slowly, that quiet choices can carry more weight than loud ones. No one brought up New Year's dinner again. They didn't need to. The memory did its job on its own. One afternoon, my mom said something small but honest. "You never needed approval, did you?" I thought about it. "I needed peace," I said. "Approval never gave me that." She nodded, like she was finally catching up. Julia and I found a new distance that worked. Not close, not hostile, just clear. We talked about normal things. Weather, work, nothing that needed a scorecard. Looking back, I'm glad I didn't announce my wins. Announcements invite judgment. Silence lets results speak. That night at the table, Julia thought she was ahead because everyone could see her success. She didn't know that some things grow stronger when no one is watching. I didn't smile to be polite. I smiled because I was already secure. And when the truth finally surfaced, it didn't need fireworks. It didn't need an argument. It just needed time. Because in the end, the strongest position isn't being praised. It's being prepared.